What if one of Germany's fastest and most efficient military operations also became the decision that doomed its entire southern front? Operation Achse did more than disarm Italy. It forced the Wehrmacht to occupy an entire collapsing state, stretching its forces across thousands of kilometers just as the Allies and resistance movements surged. To understand how a short-term success turned into a long-term strategic trap, we have to trace every step of the takeover that reshaped the war's final years. Political conditions in mid-1943 were shaped by two converging developments: the erosion of military capacity across multiple fronts and the collapse of public confidence in the government of Benito Mussolini. Italian forces had suffered major losses in North Africa, where approximately 230,000 Axis troops were captured by May 1943, including Italian divisions whose destruction weakened the army's operational strength. On the Eastern Front, Italian units had sustained more than 80,000 casualties during the Soviet winter counter-offensives of 1942 to 43. At sea, the Regia Marina no longer possessed the operational fuel reserves or air cover required to challenge Allied naval movements. The overall strategic situation generated increasing pressure within the Italian high command and among political elites, who viewed continued alliance with Germany as a path toward further military defeat and domestic instability. Allied strategic planning for operations in the Mediterranean intensified after the fall of Tunisia. The invasion of Sicily on July 9, 1943, involving roughly 160,000 Allied troops, supported by more than 2,500 aircraft, demonstrated that Italy could not repel large-scale amphibious assaults. Air raids on Rome on July 19th, conducted by around 500 U.S. AAF bombers, further eroded confidence in the government. Italian military intelligence estimated that the Allies possessed significant air and naval superiority, and reports from the fronts indicated declining morale within Italian units. Popular support for the war had diminished substantially, and industrial centers experienced heightened unrest due to shortages of food, fuel, and essential materials. Within the fascist Grand Council, debates intensified over whether Italy should seek separate peace negotiations. Senior military leaders, including General Vittorio Ambrosio, argued that preservation of national sovereignty required disengagement from the war. King Victor Emmanuel III, who maintained constitutional authority over the armed forces, became increasingly convinced that Mussolini no longer possessed the capacity to manage the crisis. The vote of no confidence on 24 to 25 July 1943, supported by 19 of 28 council members, resulted in Mussolini's dismissal and his subsequent arrest. Marshal Pietro Badoglio assumed leadership of the government, announcing that Italy would continue fighting alongside Germany while privately initiating contacts with the Allies through diplomatic channels in Lisbon and Madrid. The German High Command had anticipated the possibility of Italian defection since early 1943. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel and General Alfred Jodl drafted contingency plans under the codename Operation Achse, designed to secure key Italian territories, disarm Italian forces, and maintain German control of strategic areas in the event of an Italian armistice. German troop movements into northern and central Italy increased steadily during July and August, including the transfer of elements of the 1st Parachute Division, the 24th Panzer Division, and SS Mountain units. By early September, more than 20 German divisions were positioned within or near Italian territory, amounting to approximately 400,000 troops. Public sentiment within Italy during this period was marked by uncertainty and contradictory expectations. The dismissal of Mussolini generated widespread relief among urban populations, but the Badoglio government's public commitment to the Axis alliance created confusion regarding Italy's future course. Military commanders received no clear instructions regarding potential German actions, and units deployed in the Balkans, France, and the Aegean were dependent on German logistical networks. Reports from Italian officers indicated rising concern that cooperation with Germany had transitioned into a relationship dominated by German strategic priorities rather than mutual alliance commitments. Meanwhile, Allied strategic goals included removing Italy from the war, opening access to the central Mediterranean, and diverting German resources from the Eastern Front and Northern France negotiations, with Italian representatives culminated in the Armistice of Cassabile, signed secretly on September 3, 1943. However, the Allied command delayed public announcement of the armistice until conditions on the ground could support coordinated landings at Salerno and along the Calabrian coast. The lack of preparation for the consequences of the armistice, especially the likely German response, contributed to the chaotic situation that would unfold across Italian-controlled territories. These circumstances formed the preconditions for Operation Achse. Germany had prepared for rapid military intervention. Italy had sought an armistice without restructuring its defenses or issuing comprehensive orders. And the Allies anticipated, but did not fully plan for, the power vacuum that would emerge, the disarmament of Italian forces, the occupation of key regions, and the fragmentation of Italian political authority emerged directly from the divergent expectations that shaped the months preceding September 1943. The announcement of the armistice on the evening of the 8th of September 1943 initiated a sequence of events for which neither the Italian High Command nor regional commanders had prepared detailed operational responses. At 1830, General Dwight D. Eisenhower broadcast the terms of the armistice, followed by a brief Italian communique confirming the cessation of hostilities against Allied forces. Italian units stationed across the peninsula, the Balkans, France, and the Aegean received the information through fragmented channels, often without accompanying directives. Many officers reported that they learned of the armistice simultaneously with their German counterparts, eliminating any opportunity to organize coordinated movements or establish defensive positions. The German command initiated Operation Achse immediately following the broadcasts. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, responsible for German forces in central and southern Italy, issued orders to secure airfields, ports, communication centers, and transportation corridors. In the north, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel directed forces positioned in Lombardy, the Veneto, and the Alpine regions. German troops moved swiftly to occupy strategic sites such as Verona, Trento, Bologna, and Florence, focusing on infrastructure required for the movement of armored and mechanized units. The 2nd Parachute Division secured Rome's surrounding area, while elements of the 26th Panzer Division advanced to key intersections along the Tyrrhenian coast. Italian political leadership attempted to preserve institutional continuity, but lacked operational control. Marshal Pietro Badoglio and King Victor Emmanuel III, recognizing that German units outnumbered and outmatched the Italian forces surrounding Rome, decided to withdraw toward Pescara and then Brindisi. Their departure from the capital occurred early on the 9th of September, using a convoy of vehicles escorted by elements of the Carabinieri. The absence of central authority in Rome produced confusion within the Italian army's divisions stationed nearby. Units such as the Granatieri di Sardegna received inconsistent directives, including orders to defend the city, orders to avoid confrontation with German forces, and instructions to await further commands that never arrived. German command structures functioned with clarity and coordination. Orders emphasized speed, disarmament, and control of communication lines to prevent Italian forces from regrouping or evacuating. Liaison officers were dispatched to Italian headquarters to demand immediate surrender of weapons and materiel. In several locations, German officers presented pre-written documents outlining terms for disarmament and guaranteeing limited autonomy for Italian personnel who complied. In regions where Italian commanders refused or delayed, German units were authorized to use force to secure compliance. The Wehrmacht's overarching objective was to ensure continuity of Axis defensive operations in Italy and the Balkans by integrating the former Italian zones into German-controlled theaters. Italian commanders responded with a wide range of actions depending on local circumstances. Some divisions, such as the Achse Division on Kefalonia, attempted to negotiate coexistence with German forces but refused full disarmament. Others, including several coastal defense divisions along the Italian mainland, complied with German orders without resistance, citing lack of ammunition, absence of air support, and uncertainty about national policy. In Rome, sporadic clashes broke out between Italian troops and German units, particularly around Porta San Paolo and the Ministry of War, but the lack of coordinated leadership resulted in localized engagements lasting only hours. Civilians experienced the opening phase of Operation Achse as a period of uncertainty rather than large-scale violence. In major cities such as Turin, Milan, Naples, and Rome, public reactions ranged from relief at the end of hostilities with the Allies to apprehension regarding the German military presence. Reports indicate that German forces avoided indiscriminate actions during the first 24 hours, focusing instead on seizing armories, fuel depots, and supply warehouses. However, the presence of German patrols, checkpoints, and rapid military movements signaled the shift from alliance to occupation. Allied forces, meanwhile, initiated landings at Salerno on the morning of September 9th without full knowledge of Italian defensive positions or German deployments. Communication between Allied commanders and Italian units remained limited as the rapid German takeover of communication infrastructure hindered coordination. The Allies had anticipated a more substantial Italian contribution to the defense of key coastal areas, but Operation Achse altered the strategic landscape within hours of the armistice announcement. The opening phase of the operation demonstrated the consequences of divergent expectations between Italy, Germany, and the Allies. Italian leadership had not prepared the armed forces for an orderly transition. German commanders implemented pre-planned actions with speed and discipline, and the Allies proceeded with amphibious operations into an operational environment, shifting rapidly under German control. These developments defined the conditions in which Italian units across multiple regions would face disarmament, confrontation, or absorption into German command structures in the days that followed. German strategic objectives in Operation Achse centered on securing control of territories formerly administered or garrisoned by Italy, preventing Allied exploitation of Italian ports and airfields, and ensuring the continuity of defensive lines across southern Europe. High Command directives outline priority zones: northern and central Italy, the Adriatic coast, the Alpine passes, the Western Balkans, the Aegean Islands, and the Dodecanese. Planners calculated that rapid disarmament of approximately 1 million Italian soldiers stationed across these areas would remove a major variable from the operational environment and prevent fragmentation into independent commands capable of coordinating with the Allies. German intelligence estimated that between 600,000 and 700,000 Italian troops were concentrated in the Balkans alone, representing a potential threat to German logistical networks if left uncontrolled. The operation required synchronized action across multiple army groups. In Italy, Army Group B under Rommel and Army Group C under Kesselring divided responsibilities along a north-south axis. The 3rd Panzergrenadier Division, 29th Panzergrenadier Division, and various SS units were tasked with securing major urban centers and transportation corridors. The Luftwaffe assumed control over Italian airfields, deploying flak units to prevent Allied air intervention. The Kriegsmarine directed operations to seize Italian naval assets and prevent Italian crews from escaping to Allied-held territories. German planners assessed that success depended on speed, with a requirement to neutralize Italian forces within 48 to 72 hours to preclude organized resistance. Italian strategic goals at the time were defined almost entirely by the need to manage the consequences of the armistice while preserving territorial continuity, minimizing civilian casualties, and maintaining military cohesion. However, the Badoglio government issued no unified operational plan for resistance or coordinated withdrawal. Instructions delivered to commanders on 8 and 9 of September remained vague, emphasizing avoidance of hostilities unless attacked. Some officers interpreted this as permission to negotiate with German forces. Others viewed it as a directive to maintain defensive positions until clearer orders emerged. Italian logistics suffered from disrupted communications and lack of coordination with the Allies. Fuel reserves were insufficient for large-scale troop movements, and ammunition stocks for many units were below operational requirements. German logistic planning relied heavily on pre-positioned forces. Rail transport in northern Italy had been strengthened in July and August to enable rapid deployment of armored units. Fuel and ammunition depots captured from Italian stores were immediately integrated into German supply networks. The goal was to maintain mobility, while avoiding dependence on locally requisitioned resources during the initial phase. In the Balkans, German divisions such as the 1st Mountain Division and 11th Luftwaffe Field Division prepared to disarm Italian units stationed in Albania, Montenegro, and Greece. Planners anticipated potential resistance due to the size of Italian garrisons, but assessed that Italian units lacked sufficient cohesion and leadership to conduct sustained defensive operations. Miscalculations shaped the strategic planning of both sides. German intelligence underestimated the possibility that isolated Italian garrisons might resist disarmament or attempt evacuation to Allied lines. They predicted that Italian morale would be low enough to ensure wide-scale compliance. However, internal German assessments noted uncertainty regarding the reaction of Italian naval crews, who were considered more likely to attempt escape. The German High Command prepared contingency plans to intercept major Italian vessels, deploying U-boats and Luftwaffe strike groups to stop departures from La Spezia, Genoa, and Taranto. Italian planners, on the other hand, overestimated the ability of the Badoglio government to negotiate with the Allies while simultaneously maintaining neutrality toward Germany. They calculated that Germany would tolerate a temporary period of ambiguity while Italy shifted its political alignment. This expectation did not account for Germany's view of Italy as a critical defensive zone following the collapse of the Eastern Mediterranean Front. Italian intelligence reports, warning that German divisions were preparing for disarmament operations, were circulated but not acted upon by many commands. The belief that Italy would be able to manage a controlled transition between alliances proved incompatible with the operational tempo of German forces. Propaganda played a limited but notable role in shaping perceptions. German communications portrayed the armistice as a breach of alliance obligations, justifying the need for rapid military occupation to preserve Axis defensive lines. Messaging within German units emphasized discipline and the prevention of chaos. Italian propaganda organs ceased coordinated broadcasts after Mussolini's removal, leaving the population without clear messaging during the critical period. Rumors, unverified reports, and contradictory statements contributed to confusion among both troops and civilians. Preparatory measures varied widely across geographical regions. In Rome, Italian units received minimal directives beyond defensive readiness. In Sardinia and Corsica, Italian troops began redeploying away from German positions, but lacked vessels for large-scale transfer to the mainland. In the Balkans, Italian commanders attempted to fortify garrisons, but faced shortages of supplies and uncertainty regarding German intentions. In the Aegean, Italian units attempted to prepare defensive positions, but lacked adequate anti-aircraft and artillery support. The strategic landscape at the moment of the armistice reflected a disparity in preparation. German planners had designed a coordinated disarmament and occupation operation spanning multiple regions, while Italian planning remained fragmented, reactive, and constrained by political hesitancy. These conditions ensured that Operation Achse would unfold under significant asymmetry in operational readiness, influencing the nature and outcome of engagements across Italy and the broader Mediterranean theater. The first confrontations triggered by Operation Achse unfolded across a wide geographical area. Beginning within hours of the armistice announcement, German units, acting on pre-issued sealed orders, initiated coordinated movements to secure Italian command posts, depots, and transportation routes. The initial engagements were marked by uneven patterns of resistance shaped by local command decisions, logistical conditions, and the relative strength of nearby German formations. The German 2nd Parachute Division advanced into Rome's suburbs during the night of 8th to 9th September, encountering Italian units belonging to the Granatieri di Sardegna. Division fighting developed along Via Ostiense, Porta San Paolo, and the approaches to the Ministry of War. Italian troops inflicted measurable delays through small arms fire and defensive barricades, but their lack of coordinated artillery support limited their ability to hold ground. By late afternoon on September 10th, German forces had secured key government buildings and remaining Italian defenders dispersed or surrendered. Elsewhere in central Italy, German units seized rail hubs and road junctions with minimal resistance. In Bologna, Florence, and Verona, local Italian commands received conflicting instructions, some ordering cooperation, others recommending defensive action only if attacked. This ambiguity led to rapid German occupation of northern Italy's infrastructure. German mechanized units disarmed entire Italian regiments, often without firing a shot. Reports indicate that more than 150,000 Italian soldiers in northern regions surrendered their weapons during the first 48 hours. Territorial control shifted decisively as German security battalions, military police units, and armored detachments established checkpoints along major transit routes. In southern Italy, clashes were shaped by the simultaneous Allied landings at Salerno. German forces operating under Kesselring faced the dual requirement of resisting Allied advances while neutralizing Italian divisions in the operational area. Near Naples, elements of the German 15th Panzergrenadier Division moved swiftly to disarm Italian coastal defense units, including the 222nd Coastal Division. These units, already suffering from shortages of ammunition and lacking heavy weaponry, complied with German demands. However, in some coastal sectors adjacent to Salerno, Italian artillery crews engaged German columns approaching their batteries. These engagements were brief and poorly coordinated, as Italian commanders lacked clear operational objectives and feared retaliatory actions. In the Balkans, where Italian forces numbered more than 600,000 troops spread across Albania, Greece, Montenegro, Croatia, and Slovenia, the first confrontations varied sharply. In Albania, German units from the 1st Mountain Division disarmed Italian garrisons in Shkodër, Tirana, and Korça with little resistance. Italian divisions, isolated from the mainland and dependent on German logistics, were in no position to mount coordinated opposition. Approximately 130,000 Italian troops in Albania surrendered in the first week after the armistice. In mainland Greece, the scale and intensity of engagements increased. The Achse division on Kefalonia initially attempted to negotiate terms of coexistence with nearby German units, but refused full disarmament. Tensions escalated on the 13th of September, when German forces launched a coordinated assault, supported by artillery and aircraft, targeting Italian positions around Argostoli. Italian troops resisted for several days, resulting in more than 1,200 casualties on both sides before the division capitulated. This confrontation marked one of the largest and most intense engagements between German and Italian forces during Operation Achse. On the island of Kos, Italian and British troops attempted to establish a joint defensive perimeter following the armistice. German airborne and amphibious forces attacked on October 3rd, achieving control within 48 hours. Italian casualties exceeded 150, while British losses totaled around 90. The rapid loss of Kos demonstrated the vulnerability of isolated Italian garrisons lacking naval evacuation routes. In the Aegean Sea, the German Luftwaffe targeted Italian naval vessels attempting to reach Allied-controlled ports. Several Italian transport ships were sunk while carrying troops from Rhodes, Leros, and other islands. Territorial control across the Aegean shifted steadily as German paratroopers and infantry units occupied island after island, compelling Italian commanders to choose between surrender, resistance, or attempts to escape. Civilian populations experienced disruptions that varied by region. In Rome and northern Italy, the rapid German takeover produced limited immediate destruction, but widespread uncertainty. In the Balkans and Greece, local civilians witnessed armed confrontations between former allies, often in close proximity to urban centers. Reports from Kefalonia and Kos describe significant collateral damage to civilian dwellings due to artillery fire and close-quarters engagements. Unexpected outcomes shaped the early phase of Operation Achse. Italian resistance was more substantial in some regions, particularly Kefalonia and Kos, than German planners had predicted. Conversely, widespread compliance among mainland Italian units exceeded Allied expectations, reducing the number of forces available to assist the Allies during the Salerno landings. German actions succeeded in achieving their primary objective, limiting the ability of Italian forces to regroup or coordinate with Allied operations. The initial confrontations, though varied in intensity, created the conditions that would define the broader escalation of German control across former Italian territories. German consolidation efforts during the days following the armistice announcement expanded into a broader phase of crisis across Italian-controlled territories. As Operation Achse unfolded simultaneously in Italy, the Balkans, the Aegean, and southern France, German command structures sought to neutralize remaining Italian resistance while reinforcing positions threatened by advancing Allied forces. This required redeploying units between multiple operational zones, maintaining pressure on Italian garrisons, and establishing administrative control over regions previously governed by Italy. The rapid spread of German operations tested their logistical capacity and revealed local challenges in each theater. In central Italy, German forces moved to reinforce the defensive line stretching from the Apennines toward Lazio as Allied units advanced northward from Salerno. The German 16th Panzer Division and 29th Panzer Grenadier Division were committed to countering the Allied beachhead, while simultaneously monitoring Italian units in the surrounding provinces. By 12 September, German control of Rome was secure, but German commanders faced the challenge of integrating captured Italian stocks of equipment and fuel into their own supply networks. Approximately 70,000 Italian troops in central Italy were disarmed within the first week, reducing the possibility of organized Italian formations supporting the Allies' terrain and weather in the region complicated movement. Rainstorms on September 11th to 13th slowed German motorized columns, delaying reinforcement of the front. In northern Italy, German forces expanded administrative and military control. Army Group B established headquarters in Lake Garda's vicinity, preparing for the creation of a new political structure aligned with German interests. Resistance from Italian military units remained minimal, but Italian civilian populations expressed uncertainty about the political vacuum created by the Badoglio government's departure from Rome. German security units initiated measures to secure factories, rail junctions, and communication centers, integrating them into the German war economy. These efforts were challenged by labor shortages and sporadic work stoppages among Italian industrial workers. The Balkans experienced a more complex escalation. In Montenegro, German units of the 118 Jaeger Division encountered Italian divisions attempting to maintain defensive positions against both German forces and local partisan groups. German command viewed Italian troops as unreliable but necessary for short-term stability. Negotiations occurred in some instances, while in others German forces used direct military pressure to occupy key positions. In Croatia and Slovenia, German units encountered Italian garrisons reluctant to surrender weapons due to fears of reprisals from local resistance groups. The disarmament of approximately 210,000 Italian troops across the Western Balkans stretched German resources, as German divisions were required to garrison territory formerly held by much larger Italian formations. In Greece, the disarmament process intensified. Following the confrontations on Kefalonia and Kos, German units systematically moved through mainland Greece, disarming Italian divisions such as the Pinerolo, Cuneo, and Perugia divisions. These divisions attempted partial evacuation toward Allied-controlled areas or mountainous terrain, but faced limited mobility and shortages of fuel and rations. German units emphasized rapid occupation of ports including Piraeus, Volos, and Patras to prevent any Italian vessels from ferrying troops to Allied positions. The Luftwaffe maintained air superiority, restricting Italian attempts to regroup or relocate. The reinforcement of German control in Greece required redeployment of air and naval units already involved in operations in the eastern Mediterranean. On the Aegean Islands, escalation took a different form. German forces sought to remove Italian garrisons while preventing the Allies from establishing footholds. German airborne and amphibious operations expanded to Rhodes, Leros, and Samos. On Rhodes, where approximately 30,000 Italian troops were stationed, resistance was limited. German forces secured the island within 3 days, capturing significant Italian equipment stocks. On Leros and Samos, where British forces attempted to support Italian resistance, German air and naval units conducted sustained bombardment, The engagements produced more than 500 combined casualties and forced the surrender of Italian and British defenders by late November. Challenges emerged within German command structures as well. The simultaneous management of operations in Italy, the Balkans, and the Aegean, strained communication networks, fuel shortages, limited the mobility of armored units in southern Italy. Mountainous terrain in the Balkans complicated disarmament operations, requiring infantry-intensive deployments. The necessity of replacing Italian occupation troops with German formations increased the overall burden on German manpower, compelling transfers from other fronts. Political tensions also deepened during this period. The Badoglio government's failure to communicate unified instructions left Italian officers uncertain whether resistance to German forces aligned with national policy. Reports indicate significant psychological strain among Italian units, many of which face the dual pressure of German demands and local partisan activity. German officers, meanwhile, reported concerns about the long-term viability of controlling territories previously monitored by far larger Italian garrisons. International responses to these developments varied. Allied commanders recognized that German control over Italian infrastructure would complicate further landings and limit the ability of Italian forces to contribute to the Allied campaign. However, Allied intervention in the Balkans and Aegean remained limited due to logistical constraints and prioritization of operations in mainland Italy. The Soviet Union monitored events closely, seeing German absorption of Italian zones as a temporary redistribution of Axis resources eastward. The escalation phase of Operation Achse demonstrated the extent to which German disarmament operations reshaped the strategic landscape of southern Europe through rapid deployments, sustained pressure, and exploitation of Italian disorganization. German forces consolidated control across regions previously reliant on Italian administration. Yet the challenges associated with occupying these territories, managing resistance groups, and countering Allied advances created new pressures on German command structures, foreshadowing further strains in the months that followed. German control over former Italian territories reached its operational peak during the weeks following the armistice, as Wehrmacht and SS units completed large-scale disarmament efforts and positioned themselves to confront both advancing Allied forces and expanding partisan activity. This phase of Operation Achse required extensive coordination across army groups, as German commanders sought to stabilize newly occupied regions, secure supply routes, and reinforce vulnerable sectors. The fighting intensified in Italy, Greece, and the Aegean, while in the Balkans, German divisions faced the combined challenge of absorbing Italian responsibilities and confronting increasingly active resistance movements. In mainland Italy, the most significant operations occurred along the expanding front south of Rome. German divisions, including the 26th Panzer Division, the 16th Panzer Division, and the Hermann Göring Division, launched counterattacks designed to limit Allied penetration beyond the Salerno beachhead. These actions were conducted while simultaneously absorbing Italian coastal defense positions, engineering units, and logistics hubs into the German command structure. German forces secured the Foggia airfields, preventing immediate Allied use of the region as a forward air base. Fighting from 12 to 20 September involved continuous artillery exchanges, movement of armored units across narrow mountain passes, and coordinated Luftwaffe strikes. Casualties on both sides increased steadily, with German reports indicating more than 3,500 losses during the counteroffensive and Allied reports documenting comparable figures. Rome, despite having fallen under German control on September 10th, became a crucial logistical center during this period. German engineers fortified the city's surroundings, constructed defensive positions along the Gustav Line, and transported captured Italian materiel, estimated at more than 300,000 rifles, 12,000 machine guns, and several hundred artillery pieces. To units on the southern front, German signals intelligence established new command nodes in Rome, Florence, and Verona to coordinate operations across the peninsula. The movement of German reinforcements towards central Italy, however, strained road networks and fuel reserves, contributing to delays in fortifying the defensive lines meant to slow the Allied advance. In northern Italy, German forces consolidated their presence by reorganizing administrative structures and integrating Italian industrial capabilities into their war economy. Factories in Turin, Milan, and Genoa were placed under German supervision, with production redirected toward German needs. The seizure of Italian rolling stock, more than 1,500 locomotives, and thousands of rail cars allowed German divisions to move more effectively throughout the region. German security units increased their patrols to monitor potential disruptions from workers' strikes or political groups. Civilian populations experienced heightened restrictions, including curfews, rationing adjustments, and the presence of military police along major transit routes. The peak of the campaign took on a different form across the Balkans. In Montenegro, German units had to replace Italian divisions previously responsible for garrisoning large mountainous areas. This transition led to a series of engagements with local resistance groups who exploited the power vacuum created by the Italian withdrawal. German units initiated numerous operations to secure transportation corridors and urban centers, sustaining several hundred casualties in the process. In Albania, the disarmament of Italian troops was completed by early October, but German forces reported ongoing clashes with resistance groups in the hinterlands, requiring repeated deployment of reinforcement battalions. Greece remained one of the most active theaters of German operations during this phase. The rapid occupation of Italian zones on the mainland was followed by intensified operations on the islands. After securing Rhodes, German forces executed sustained campaigns against Leros and Samos, deploying naval units, paratroopers, and ground forces. The battles for Leros in November involved more than 2,500 British and approximately 3,500 Italian defenders. German forces, using concentrated air attacks, followed by amphibious landings, secured the island after 8 days of fighting. Casualty reports indicate more than 800 combined losses during the operation. The capture of Leros completed German control of the Dodecanese and eliminated potential Allied footholds in the southeastern Aegean. The Aegean Sea became a focal point for German naval and air operations. Italian ships attempting to reach Alexandria, Malta, or Brindisi were intercepted or attacked. Luftwaffe dive bombers targeted Italian cruisers and destroyers, sinking several vessels, including the cruiser Bari, and multiple troop transports. German naval units seized Italian bases at Leros, Ceuta Bay, and Rhodes, which provided anchorages for future operations and supply movements. These gains, however, required continued deployment of flak batteries and coastal defense units, adding to German resource demands. Throughout these areas, civilian populations faced significant disruptions. In mainland Italy, ongoing combat near Naples and Salerno resulted in damage to infrastructure, including bridges, rail lines, and supply depots. In Greece and the Balkans, population centers near Italian garrisons or transportation hubs experienced heightened military activity, searches, and requisitioning of resources. The shifting control of territories, the arrival of German units, and the uncertainty of Italian authority created unstable conditions that affected daily life, economic routines, and local governance. The peak of Operation Achse revealed the extent of German operational capacity, as well as the burdens inherent in replacing an entire Allied state's military and administrative apparatus. German forces succeeded in capturing Italian equipment, securing strategic positions, and preventing Allied exploitation of Italian defects. However, the cost of these gains, including extended fronts, overextended supply lines, and growing resistance movements, foreshadowed the longer-term challenges Germany would face as the war progressed into its later stages. German forces, having secured control over former Italian positions, now faced the secondary challenge of maintaining stability across vast and diverse territories. Resistance movements, reorganized Italian units, and shifting Allied operations forced German commanders to adapt quickly to an environment defined by fluid front lines, unreliable supply routes, and increasingly complex political dynamics. Operation Achse transitioned from a rapid disarmament campaign into a sustained effort to suppress disorder and reinforce weakened garrisons. The Wehrmacht and SS confronted growing demands for manpower, even as strategic priorities elsewhere in Europe continued to intensify. In mainland Italy, German units entrenched along the Gustav Line confronted not only Allied attacks advancing northward, but also emerging Italian resistance groups. Former Italian soldiers, who had either evaded German detention or been released after disarmament, joined civilian-led formations operating in mountainous regions around Abruzzo, Umbria, and Tuscany. These groups focused on sabotaging German communication lines, attacking isolated patrols, and assisting escaped Allied prisoners. German commanders deployed security battalions, military police, and elements of the 114th Jaeger Division to counter these actions. Reports from October and November indicated dozens of documented engagements between German units and partisan formations, often resulting in temporary disruptions to rail and road traffic along critical north-south corridors. Adaptation efforts extended to German logistical structures. The rapid transition from alliance to occupation left German supply networks overstretched. Armored divisions redeployed southward required fuel, spare parts, and ammunition at levels far exceeding local reserves. German engineers worked to repair bridges damaged by Allied bombings and to clear equipment abandoned by Italian formations. Yet, despite these efforts, German units frequently reported shortages, particularly in fuel and transport capacity. The Wehrmacht attempted to integrate seized Italian inventory, vehicles, horses, and weapons, into its operational system, but compatibility issues and the poor condition of much captured materiel limited its usefulness. In northern Italy, the establishment of the Italian Social Republic altered the strategic picture. The new state, declared on September 23, 1943, and headquartered in Salo, nominally restored Italian administrative authority under Benito Mussolini, who had been rescued by German commandos. However, German control remained dominant. German units relied on local Italian formations to supplement manpower and assist in garrison duties, but these units required extensive retraining and suffered from low morale and limited cohesion. German commanders used a combination of political pressure, incentives, and security measures to maintain cooperation. Even so, resistance groups in the Alps and Po Valley increased their activities, forcing German forces to use additional patrols, convoys, and intelligence operations to counter partisan attacks. In the Balkans, adaptation became even more complex. German divisions inherited extensive anti-partisan responsibilities previously handled by Italian forces, whose presence had included more than 200,000 troops in Croatia and Slovenia. German units confronted multiple armed factions, including communist partisans, nationalist groups, and local militias. Operations by the 7th SS Mountain Division, the 118th Jaeger Division, and other formations included sweeping actions across mountainous terrain in Bosnia, Montenegro, and Slovenia. These operations required significant manpower and frequently resulted in temporary territorial control rather than lasting suppression. The absence of Italian garrisons increased the strategic burden on German divisions already overstretched by commitments in Greece and the Aegean. Greece itself became a significant theater of German adaptation. The replacement of Italian occupation forces required redeployment of more than 40,000 German troops across the mainland and islands. German logistical demands increased substantially, as supply routes from the Balkans to the Peloponnese had to be fortified against sabotage partisan groups, particularly in Thessaly, Epirus, and Macedonia, expanded operations targeting rail lines and German convoys. German command responded by implementing a strict system of checkpoints, fortified outposts, and counter-sabotage patrols. Nevertheless, attacks on German columns, ammunition depots, and communication lines continued throughout the final months of 1943, forcing repeated diversions of frontline resources toward internal security missions. In the Aegean, German forces adapted by reorganizing naval and air assets around newly captured bases such as Rhodes, Leros, and Ceuta Bay. These positions allowed Germany to maintain surveillance over Allied movements between Cyprus, Egypt, and Turkey. However, constant Allied air raids damaged facilities and required continuous repairs, German units also confronted shortages of experienced crews capable of operating seized Italian vessels, resulting in operational delays and reduced naval mobility. Psychological and morale-related challenges emerged across all theaters. Italian troops who surrendered often expressed uncertainty about their future status, and German command struggled to manage large numbers of prisoners while maintaining security. German troops, meanwhile, reported fatigue from extended operations, unclear timelines for relief, and the burden of policing territories that lacked stable political structures. The combination of ongoing combat, occupation duties, and supply difficulties contributed to declining morale in several divisions, as noted in internal German assessments. Innovation and improvisation became necessary for German forces to sustain operations. Commanders implemented mobile security detachments to respond quickly to partisan attacks. Engineers constructed fortified checkpoints along major roadways. Signal units established redundant communication networks to prevent disruptions caused by sabotage. German intelligence services expanded infiltration efforts aimed at identifying resistance leaders and securing cooperation from local populations. These efforts produced localized successes, but often required significant manpower and resources. The resistance and adaptation phase of Operation Achse revealed the long-term implications of the German decision to absorb the entire Italian military and administrative zone. While German forces succeeded in establishing control across vast territories, the demands of occupation, the rise of partisan activity, and the ongoing Allied offensive placed increasing pressure on German command and supply structures. The need for constant adaptation highlighted the operational limits of Germany's ability to sustain control over regions far larger than those it had previously managed, setting the stage for decisive turning points that would follow. The turning point in the aftermath of Operation Achse emerged from the convergence of three developments: the expanding Allied offensive in mainland Italy, the accelerating growth of resistance networks across occupied territories, and the cumulative strain placed on German forces tasked with replacing the entire Italian military structure. By late 1943 and early 1944, these pressures reshaped the operational landscape and exposed the limits of German capacity to maintain dominance across southern Europe. What had begun as a rapid and largely successful disarmament operation now evolved into a struggle to preserve control over territories that demanded continuous reinforcement, reorganization, and defensive commitment. In mainland Italy, the most significant turning point occurred along the Gustav Line. German commanders, having redirected divisions to secure former Italian positions, now faced the full weight of Allied offensives directed at Monte Cassino and the approaches to Rome. Between January and May 1944, 4 major battles involved more than 240,000 Allied troops and approximately 200,000 German defenders. German divisions, including the 10th Army units formed from forces previously deployed in Operation Achse, held their positions but reported rapid depletion of ammunition reserves, fuel shortages, and significant casualties. The need to sustain heavy fighting along the Gustav Line diverted reinforcements originally intended for occupation duties in the Balkans and Greece, weakening German capacity in those regions. Resistance movements played an increasingly decisive role in tipping the balance. In northern and central Italy, partisans intensified sabotage operations targeting bridges, tunnels, and rail lines essential for German troop movement. The disruption of the Bologna-Florence rail line in late 1943 forced German commanders to reroute supplies over secondary roads that were more vulnerable to Allied air attacks. Reports noted more than 1,000 recorded sabotage incidents in the final months of 1943 alone. Resistance groups grew through the incorporation of deserters, escaped prisoners of war, and former Italian officers who had survived the disarmament phase. Their expanding presence diverted German manpower into counterinsurgency roles, weakening the coherence of defensive lines facing the Allies. In the Balkans, the turning point manifested through the collapse of the previous Italian occupation system and the inability of German forces to fully replace it. By early 1944, German divisions found themselves stretched across thousands of kilometers of mountainous terrain, confronted by partisan armies numbering more than 200,000 fighters across Yugoslavia. Alone, German commands estimated that as much as 50% of their deployed manpower was dedicated to security and anti-resistance operations, rather than frontline combat operations, designed to clear partisan-held areas, often produce temporary control, but failed to achieve lasting stability. This dynamic undermined German authority, increased supply consumption, and eroded morale. The situation in Greece began shifting as well. The transfer of German units from Greece to Italy in early 1944, approximately 15,000 troops, reduced the German capacity to maintain control over remote regions. Partisan groups expanded their attacks on rail lines connecting Thessaloniki and Athens, as well as coastal installations supporting German naval operations. Allied aircraft launched more frequent strikes against the Peloponnese and Aegean routes, targeting German supply convoys and fuel depots. As a result, German command increasingly relied on static defensive positions, enabling the resistance to strengthen its territorial presence. In the Aegean, the turning point appeared through the growing impact of Allied air and naval dominance. Although Germany had consolidated control over the Dodecanese by late 1943, Allied air raids originating from Cyprus and the Middle East intensified German-held airfields at Rhodes, Samos, and Leros came under repeated attack, reducing the operational capacity of the Luftwaffe. Supply convoys to the islands suffered losses due to Allied submarines and aircraft, forcing German units to ration fuel, ammunition, and food. These constraints limited Germany's ability to use the Aegean bases as forward positions and gradually shifted the operational advantage toward the Allies. Political developments further contributed to the turning point. The establishment of the Italian Social Republic provided Germany with a nominal partner, but did not significantly reduce German administrative burdens. Italian personnel integrated into the new state's security apparatus required oversight, training, and enforcement of discipline. Many units remained resistant to German directives or lacked sufficient cohesion for sustained operations. German and Italian Social Republic forces struggled to coordinate responses to growing partisan activity in the Po Valley and Alpine regions. Meanwhile, the failure of Italy to provide meaningful military assistance to the Allies in the immediate aftermath of the armistice limited Allied expectations, but also underscored the long-term consequences of Operation Achse. German domination of the peninsula prolonged the Italian campaign, forcing the Allies to commit additional resources and manpower. Yet, the same German successes created vulnerabilities. The Wehrmacht's assumption of Italian responsibilities extended its commitments far beyond sustainable levels, especially in regions where guerrilla resistance intensified and Allied operations expanded. By early 1944, German commanders recognized that the strategic situation had shifted decisively. Operation Achse succeeded in disarming Italian forces and securing key territories, but its long-term consequences included the creation of overextended occupation zones, widespread resistance movements, and a diversion of forces from critical fronts. These developments collectively marked the turning point at which German defensive capacity began to decline across southern Europe, setting the conditions for the subsequent collapse of Axis control in Italy and the Balkans. The concluding phase of Operation Achse unfolded as German forces attempted to manage a gradual but irreversible contraction of their control across the territories formerly administered by Italy. From mid-1944 onward, developments on multiple fronts forced German units to withdraw, abandon positions, or redirect resources toward defensive operations that overshadowed occupation duties. The retreat did not occur in a single coordinated movement, but rather through a series of linked responses to Allied advances, resistance offensives, logistical collapse, and political fragmentation. This phase reveals how the accomplishments of Achse in late 1943 were steadily undone by strategic pressures that Germany could no longer counterbalance. In mainland Italy, the most significant shifts followed the Allied breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944. The fall of the Gustav Line required German forces to withdraw northward to the Trasimene Line, and later the Gothic Line units originally deployed during or immediately after Achse, such as the 1st Parachute Division, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, and elements of the Hermann Göring Division, were forced into continuous retreat while maintaining rearguard actions. These movements required abandoning hundreds of kilometers of territory previously secured during the disarmament phase. Italian regions once under direct German control, including Rome, Naples, and Campania, came under Allied administration following the German withdrawal in June 1944. German reports highlight the extensive destruction of transport infrastructure, bridges, and supply depots undertaken to slow the Allied advance, including the demolition of key rail links between Florence and Rome. As German lines shifted northward, Italian partisans expanded their activities. Resistance groups controlled significant areas in Emilia, Romagna, Piedmont, Veneto, and the Alpine foothills. These territories became staging grounds for attacks on German convoys, ammunition depots, and communication centers. The withdrawal of German forces from central Italy allowed partisan numbers to grow, with estimates reaching more than 80,000 fighters by late 1944. This rise in resistance activity increased German losses and complicated the movement of equipment and personnel toward defensive positions. In the North, German rearguard units reported more than 1,500 sabotage incidents between June and September 1944, illustrating the escalating impact of local resistance on retreating formations. In the Balkans, withdrawal unfolded under even more challenging conditions. German units that had replaced approximately 200,000 Italian troops in 1943 now found themselves confronting large, coordinated partisan offensives in Yugoslavia, Albania, and Greece. By mid-1944, German divisions, including the 1st Mountain Division, the 7th SS Mountain Division, and the 297th Infantry Division, were ordered to retreat toward Austria, Hungary, and Slovenia. These withdrawals required abandoning long-held positions in Bosnia and Montenegro. The collapsing German front created a chain reaction. Supply depots were evacuated or destroyed, airfields were rendered unusable, and communication lines were systematically dismantled to delay partisan advances. German losses increased significantly as retreating units participated in engagements along the Drina, Sava, and Morava rivers, often lacking sufficient artillery, fuel, or air support. In Greece, the German withdrawal was triggered by the Soviet advance through the Balkans and the collapse of German positions in Romania and Bulgaria. The evacuation of German troops from mainland Greece began in September 1944 and continued into October, involving more than 60,000 personnel. Retreating units faced persistent attacks from Greek resistance groups, targeting convoys along the strategic Athens-Larissa and Thessaloniki-Skopje routes. The evacuation of the Aegean Islands posed logistical challenges as well. German garrisons on Rhodes, Crete, and other islands attempted to maintain defensive positions, despite shortages of fuel and supplies. While some garrisons held out into 1945, the retreat from mainland Greece effectively isolated these positions, reducing their strategic relevance. The German naval withdrawal reflected similar conditions. Vessels seized during Achse, including Italian destroyers, torpedo boats, and transport ships, were either scuttled, sunk by Allied aircraft, or abandoned due to lack of fuel. German convoys attempting to move personnel from the Aegean to the mainland suffered losses from Allied submarine attacks. The loss of these naval assets eliminated the ability to reinforce garrisons in the Dodecanese, or maintain supply lines across the eastern Mediterranean. Civilian populations across these regions experienced significant disruption. In Italy, retreating German forces implemented demolitions intended to slow the Allied advance, including destruction of bridges over the Arno, Reno, and Po rivers. These demolitions disrupted civilian transport, agriculture, and economic activity. In the Balkans, German withdrawals created vacuums that were quickly filled by partisan administrations, resulting in shifts of political authority and rapid changes in local governance. In Greece, shortages of food and fuel worsened as German units requisitioned remaining stocks for evacuation purposes. Italian soldiers captured during the disarmament phase in 1943 now played a role in this final stage. More than 600,000 Italian military internees remained in German custody throughout 1944, assigned to labor units supporting German logistics and fortification efforts. As German forces withdrew, many of these internees were relocated to camps in Austria and Germany, while others were abandoned during evacuations or liberated by advancing Allied units. German command structures recognized the inevitability of withdrawal, but attempted to stage orderly retreats. The emphasis shifted from holding territory to preserving combat-ready formations for future defensive operations in Austria and northern Italy. However, the cumulative effects of partisan actions, loss of transport capacity, and ongoing Allied offensives limited the coherence of these movements. Many units withdrew under constant pressure, with fragmented communication and declining availability of fuel and ammunition. The withdrawal phase demonstrated that the territorial gains achieved during Operation Achse had become strategically unsustainable. The Wehrmacht was forced to relinquish regions acquired at considerable expense, while the collapse of the Italian occupation system resulted in disproportionate burdens on German forces. The end of Achse's territorial legacy coincided with the broader contraction of German power across southern Europe, setting the stage for the final collapse of Axis defenses in Italy and the Balkans in 1945. Operation Achse left a long-term legacy that extended far beyond the immediate consequences of Italy's disarmament in September 1943. Its outcomes shaped the military, political, and social landscape of southern Europe throughout the final phase of the war, and influenced post-war interpretations of alliance systems, occupation policies, and the dynamics of collapsing coalitions. The operation stands as a case study in the strategic implications of replacing an Allied military structure with direct occupation, demonstrating both the short-term effectiveness and long-term costs of such an approach. Militarily, Achse achieved Germany's immediate objective, preventing Italian forces from assisting the Allies or establishing independent positions that could disrupt German defenses. The seizure of more than 1,500 artillery pieces, thousands of machine guns, and extensive stockpiles of ammunition enabled German units to reinforce the Gustav Line and sustain operations well into 1944. The occupation of Italy also delayed the Allied advance, forcing the commitment of more than 15 Allied divisions and extending the Italian campaign to nearly 2 years. Yet these gains imposed a substantial operational burden. The need to garrison Italy, Greece, the Balkans, and the Aegean consumed German divisions at a time when they were increasingly needed on the Eastern Front. And in northern France, German command assessments from late 1943 and 1944 consistently noted that occupation responsibilities tied down more than 20 divisions that might otherwise have been redeployed to counter major Allied offensives. The political consequences of Achse were significant. The collapse of the fascist regime and the establishment of the Italian Social Republic redefined Italy's wartime trajectory. The split between the Badoglio government in the south and the new fascist administration in the north created a dual-state structure that contributed to prolonged instability. German occupation policies shaped political life through direct military oversight, censorship, and security controls. Meanwhile, the rise of partisan movements in both Italy and the Balkans produced new political actors who would later play pivotal roles in post-war governments. Achse, by eliminating Italy as an Axis partner, also shifted the balance of power within the coalition, leaving Germany without a major ally in southern Europe. The humanitarian consequences were profound. The disarmament of Italian forces resulted in the detention of more than 600,000 Italian military internees who were transported to labor camps across Germany and Eastern Europe. These individuals, denied the status of prisoners of war, were subjected to forced labor in agriculture, construction, and industrial production. German occupation policies in Italy, Greece, and the Balkans resulted in widespread requisitioning of food, fuel, and housing, exacerbating shortages that affected millions of civilians. The retreat phase of 1944 added further hardship, as infrastructure destruction, especially the demolition of bridges and rail lines, disrupted supply chains and civilian mobility, In Greece and Yugoslavia, fighting between German security units and resistance groups led to significant civilian displacement and economic damage, whose effects persisted long after the war. Operation Achse also influenced the broader strategic trajectory of the Second World War. By securing Italy, Germany temporarily stabilized its southern flank, enabling the Wehrmacht to fight prolonged defensive battles that delayed but did not prevent Allied progress. However, the diversion of troops to occupation duties weakened German positions elsewhere. The Eastern Front, where German forces were already overstretched, received fewer reinforcements as divisions were redirected to manage former Italian territories. In France, preparations for defending against the Allied invasion in 1944 were affected by shortages of experienced troops who remained tied down in the Balkans and Italy. Thus, the success of Achse paradoxically contributed to German strategic overextension. The operation also shaped post-war memory and historical interpretation. In Italy, Achse is often viewed as a turning point that underscored the fragility of the alliance with Germany and exposed internal divisions within the armed forces. Local experiences of disarmament, occupation, and resistance became central to national narratives about the war. In Greece and the Balkans, the abrupt transition from Italian to German occupation intensified resistance movements, which later influenced post-war political developments, including civil conflicts. German military historians have examined Achse as an example of efficient planning and coordination, but also as evidence of the costs associated with occupying territories that lack stable political structures. Internationally, Achse contributed to discussions about coalition, management, and the risks of asymmetric alliances. The collapse of Italy revealed how diverging war aims and internal political pressures could undermine collective strategy. Post-war military planning in NATO, the Warsaw Pact, and other alliances referenced the Italian experience as a cautionary example of the need for clearer communication, shared objectives, and contingency planning for political shifts among partners. In the final assessment, Operation Achse achieved its immediate operational goals, but imposed long-term strategic liabilities on Germany. The successful disarmament of Italian forces allowed Germany to maintain defensive positions in Italy and the Balkans temporarily, but the cost included overextension, increased partisan resistance, and the commitment of forces that were urgently needed elsewhere. Politically and socially, the operation reshaped Italy's wartime experience and contributed to transformed political landscapes across southern Europe. Its legacy persists as an example of how wartime alliances can fracture under pressure, and how occupation, even when executed efficiently, can generate enduring consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield.